Good afternoon and welcome to our Master the Margin series. We welcome everyone today. My name is Bonnie Bond with Sykes & Company. I am a CPA and shareholder here with the firm, and this is Kendall Harris. He is also a CPA with Sykes & Company. My name across my screen may say Alan Sykes, but I am not. That is just the organizer of this webinar, so I am filling in for Alan today. We appreciate everyone joining us. Today we have two individuals from Brown and Fortunato, Mr. Kelly Custer and Jeff Baird. We are going to be discussing multiple items today with these guys. I'm going to let Jeff introduce the both of them here in a second. Just some quick housekeeping items. Please drop in your questions as they come up. I will monitor the questions and try to nicely interrupt these guys when they're talking and bring those questions on board so we can discuss those as we move along. We love that, so please do that as you go. And we'll wrap this up towards the end of the hour and finish off any questions we have at that time. So Jeff, you want to take it and with your introduction?
I'll take it. Folks, my name is Jeff Baird. I'm chairman of the healthcare group for Brown Fortunato. I'm with my partner, Kelly Custer, one of our senior attorneys in the group. We have 16 attorneys in our healthcare group. We represent a large number of pharmacies and other providers in all 50 states. We, as a firm, we've been working with Alan and Kendall and Bonnie and Scotty and their team for many, many years. Alan and Scotty and Bonnie and I are close friends. And I can tell you that Sykes & Company is the best when it comes to accounting services and accounting advice to pharmacies. There's nobody that even comes close to them. And I'm glad that Bonnie is moderating this. I like her better than Alan anyway. So, but we're going to have a lot of fun. Now, what Kelly and we're going to kind of divide the slides up and then talk about a number of things. As you have questions, just type them in to however you want to do it. Get them to Bonnie, and she'll ask us the questions, and Kelly and I'll answer them. And this is as cheap as you're going to get attorneys, and so just ask away. You'll try to limit it to healthcare if you can, but I guess if you want to ask those questions about traffic tickets and DUIs and cheap divorces, we'll talk about those as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and get going. Let's try to put things into perspective. Back in 1965, when President Johnson signed the Medicare Act into law, there were 23 million of what Tom Brokaw called the greatest generation. Now, Kendall and Bonnie are too young to know who Tom Brokaw is, but he was a famous news anchor with NBC for decades. And he called the 23 million of the greatest generation. Brokaw referred to them, they were the World War II generation. And they were the ones that were adults at the time that the Medicare Act was signed into law. They're pretty much gone. The greatest generation has been replaced by baby boomers. And there are now 78 million baby boomers, folks born between 46 and 64, and they are retiring at the rate of 10,000 per day. I'm a boomer. Kelly and Kendall and Bonnie are not. But unlike prior generations, it made sense way back in 1965 for the retirement age to be 65 years old, because your average factory worker in Detroit would work till he's 65, retire, and die at 66. Now, boomers today, we're going to live to be 80 years old. Our bodies are going to break down at 70. There are 78 million of us. There's not a pot of gold in Washington, D.C. to pay for health care. You millennials have to pay for us. And that's a challenge. And so the demand for, the demand for health care, the demand for what pharmacies have to offer will only go through the roof. At the same time, there's only so much money to go around. So this is your quintessential irresistible force meeting the immovable object. Huge demand, limited money. And so as providers, we're being squeezed. It's going to always be I guess for the rest of our careers, will always be this give and take, this tug of war as far as demand, but limited reimbursement coming our way. And so the challenge for pharmacies is how can we set ourselves apart from our competition? If I have Jeff's Pharmacy on Main Street and Bonnie has Bonnie's Pharmacy on Elm Street, then what can I do to make myself more attractive to customers so that they will come to me as opposed to going to Bonnie? And the short answer is I can do a number of things, but let's be careful, because as pharmacies, we live in the quintessential glass house. If we do something, we're doing something we shouldn't be doing, somebody knows about it, and we have to adhere or follow a number of federal and state laws. And so while we're, as a pharmacy, while we are offering what I call value-added services to customers, in other words, I want to set myself apart from what Bonnie's doing, and so I'm going to provide value-added services to my customers that she doesn't do, and that sets me apart. I can do that, but let's be a bit careful. And so Kelly and I are going to talk about what the laws are, and then we're going to give you all kinds of examples. So with that, Bonnie, let's go to the next slide. Kelly?
Thanks, Jeff. As Jeff mentioned, the quintessential issue here is how do we give value to our providers, to our referring providers, to patients. Before we can get there, it's really vital that we know what we can't do. Obviously, the goal of this webinar is to really look at what we can do, but let's go ahead and set the guardrails first and talk about what we can't do. The first relevant statute that we need to talk about is Beneficiary Inducement. This statute prohibits a provider from offering or giving anything of value to a federal healthcare program beneficiary that the provider knows or should know is likely to persuade that person to purchase a product or service covered by that federal healthcare program. It is essentially giving something so that you get that business. In the preamble to the regulations, the OIG states that the inducement statute does not prohibit gifts of nominal value. Unlike some of the other dollar figures that are involved in some of these federal statutes and regulations, the OIG has defined nominal value in a very static way. It's $15 per item or $75 in the aggregate. And retail value is the measure that needs to be used here. So it doesn't matter what you can buy it for at wholesale or what you can get it for on a deal. The relevant measure is what a patient would pay if they went to buy that product or service.
And let me add something to that, Kelly. Under the nominal value exception, the gifts that we can offer somebody have to be something that basically can be touched and felt. It cannot be cash or cash equivalents. And so, yes, we can offer things, inducements, if you will, as long as they are of nominal value. There was a big box chain a couple of years ago, and I imagine that a number of you have on this webinar are aware of this. But there was this big chain that was advertising, hey, listen, you switch from Bonnie's Pharmacy to us, big box, and we will give you a $50 gift certificate. Okay. But that pharmacy chain had real smart lawyers, because the byline at the bottom of the ad was, oh, but if you're covered by a federal healthcare program, this doesn't apply to you. Well, there was no way in God's green earth that a 28-year-old pharmacy tech sitting behind the counter was going to say to 78-year-old Mr. Smith, who comes in and says, I want to switch from Bonnie's Pharmacy to you, and I want my gift certificate. There's no way that the pharmacy tech was going to say, oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Smith, you're too old. You don't get this gift certificate. Well, so they were handling these things out like popcorn, and there was a whistleblower lawsuit, and this big box had to pay a whole bunch of money to the Department of Justice. And so, we just need to be careful with the Benny inducement statute. Okay, Kelly.
Well, can I just ask a question? And I don't want to get ahead of everything, but one thing that I do.
I'm sorry, Bonnie. We don't take questions, Bonnie. I'm sorry.
Not from me.
Okay.
One thing that I get a lot from clients, they ask a lot about copays, and so especially small amounts. The word nominal came to mind. I think that was the last time I've been asked that. That was the word they used to describe it. So maybe they just want to waive those, or just to not try to collect them if they're small items. So where do you guys stand on that?
Sure.
When we get that question a lot?
Yeah, in fact, we actually have some slides later on. They're going to cover
Okay.
this, but let's just cover it now. Let me cover co-payments now, Kelly, and then we can move on to the anti-kickback statute. Is that okay? All right. The law is clear. Whether you're a pharmacy, a DME company, a lab, a home health agency, a doctor, or a hospital, you have to make a reasonable effort to collect a copayment. No questions asked. There's no ambiguity. There's no gray area. You have to make a reasonable effort. If the patient is covered by any federal health care program, Part B, Part D, I don't know, Medicare Advantage, whatever it is, and if we are not making a reasonable effort to collect the copayment, then we are, as a pharmacy, we can be violating the federal anti-kickback statute, which is a criminal statute, the Beneficiary Inducement statute that you have in front of you, and the False Claims Act. So, going back to Bonnie's question, though, what in the world does making a reasonable effort, what does that mean? Well, that's not really defined. And oh, by the way, this obligation to make a reasonable effort to collect a copayment, not only does that apply to patients covered by a federal health care program, but it also applies to commercial insurance patients, PBM patients. Every contract that we have with a PBM is going to say you got to try to collect your copayment. State law says you got to try to collect a copayment. So what does that really mean? We don't have to go crazy on a patient. We don't have to take the patient to small claims court. We have to, basically what the law says is this: when I, as Just Pharmacy, sell a drug to Mr. Smith, I say to Mr. Smith, here's your drug, you owe 20%, pay me money. That's what the law says. I don't offer to waive it. I don't offer to reduce it. I just say, pay me money. Only when Mr. Smith says, look, Jeff, I'm poor, I don't have the money. That's when I say, oh, well, in that case, we here at Just Pharmacy have this financial hardship program. So why don't you, let me get some information from you and let me find out how you are financially. And if you fall within our guidelines, then yes, we can waive this copayment. Now, going back to Bonnie's specific question, though, is what happens, which is sometimes the case, if the copayment is, I don't know, $1.75. Now, it's not worth, I get it, it's not worth going after $1.75. And so my thoughts would be that our protocol would be, Mr. Smith, here's your drug, pay me $1.75. And then Mr. Smith just goes silent on us. We can't find him. My thoughts would be, okay, we will send out an invoice. We'll send out maybe one invoice to $1.75. And then if he doesn't respond to that, then we'll put him on our naughty list. And that's really about all we can do. Now, obviously, that's reasonable for a $1.75 copayment.
Right.
Now, if instead Mr. Smith has a $120 copayment, then what would be reasonable would be to send him a couple of invoices, maybe a letter, maybe a phone call. That's reasonable. And so with these teeny tiny copayments, let's make an effort, but we don't have to do very much. Does that answer your question, Bonnie?
It does.
Okay, let's go to the next slide.
Two of the other relevant statutes that we talk about a lot in healthcare law are the federal anti-kickback statute, the AKS, and the federal physician self-referral statute, what's commonly known as Stark Law. Under the AKS, it's a felony for a healthcare provider to knowingly and willfully offer or pay any remuneration to induce a person or entity to refer an individual for the furnishing or arranging for the furnishing of any item for which payment may be made under an FHCP. This includes both purchase and lease items. It's not limited to one or the other. As Jeff mentioned, this is a criminal statute. It's a felony, and so it needs to be taken very seriously. The roughly corresponding civil statute that applies, but only to physicians, is the Stark Law. Under the Stark Law, if a physician has a financial relationship with an entity providing a designated health service, then the physician cannot refer a Medicare or Medicaid patient to the entity unless a Stark exception applies. For the purposes of this webinar, we're not going to go into the exceptions. They're broad and they matter, but they're not necessarily relevant to value-added services in a pharmacy because they really apply to physicians. So we're not going to jump into that in a deep way. But it's important to know that some of the designated health services include DME, prosthetics, OMP, outpatient prescription drugs, and home health.
Okay, and let me kind of add to that. Again, Kelly and I could talk for the next 4 hours just on the AKS and Stark, and that's not the purpose of this webinar. But just realize that when people, let me get rid of a couple of urban legends here. Anybody can be a referral source. A doctor, a nurse, a discharge planner, a kindergarten teacher, a taxi cab driver, or a potted plant. They can refer to us, and if we pay them some money, directly or indirectly, or give them anything of value, we have a potential problem under the AKS, which is a criminal statute. Stark, on the other hand, is civil, not criminal. So AKS, you can go to Club Fed. Stark is just civil. Stark only applies to doctors and dentists and chiropractors and folks like that. And with Stark, if you violate it, we just have to pay money. Now, under the anti-kickback statute, and again, I don't want your eyes to glaze over, but if I, as Jeff's Pharmacy, if I'm giving a bunch of free stuff to a patient that I should not be giving, again, Kelly and I are going to talk to you about what we can do. But let's say we're giving a bunch of free stuff that we shouldn't be giving to a patient that ends up inducing that patient to come to me rather than Bonnie's Pharmacy, then even though there's not a third party involved, in other words, there's not Dr. Jones referring the patient to me, there's not a discharge planner referring the patient to me, it's just between me and the patient. Nevertheless, by offering something of value to that patient that I shouldn't do, that I should not offer, that can violate the kickback statute. So that's the reason we put this in there. Okay? Okay, Kelly? Do the next slide.
Yes.
I'm going to ask one more thing. Another thing, things are popping in my head from clients. Again, I'm sorry if we get out of order. We know we have a lot of clients. They love to send gifts, breakfast, lunches, different things to providers and doctors and providers in the area. So what are your feelings on that, Jeff?
You got it. Great question, Bonnie. And folks, Bonnie knows more than most healthcare attorneys. And the only reason she's not an attorney.
That is not true.
No, the only reason Bonnie's not an attorney, she's just way too honest. So that's a good question. Okay. Oh, good heavens. The anti-kickback statute says that Just Pharmacy cannot offer anything of value to anybody or anything in exchange for referring a patient or arranging for the referral of a patient or for even recommending the purchase of something that's covered by a government healthcare program. That's what it says. Now, technically, let's say that I have Just Pharmacy. Dr. Jones is a big referral source. And once a year, I drop off a box of Krispy Kreme donuts. Now, technically, I guess that could be a kickback. Why? Well, I'm giving a $4 box of donuts to Dr. Jones. So is that a problem? And the answer is, of course not. Why? Because who cares? That's why. It's a $4 box of donuts, okay? It's not like I'm sending Dr. Jones's staff down to Kabul for 4 days. So when it comes to the anti-kickback statute, and particularly when it comes to lunches, donuts, breakfasts, things like that, to Dr. Jones's staff, there's really not an exception or a safe harbor that says, here's what you can and can't do. There's just nothing out there. And so what I say, so we just need to be smart about it. In fraud and abuse land, if your brain tells you one thing and your stomach tells you something else, you ignore your brain and you trust your stomach. Your brain can deceive you. Your stomach never lies. And so Dr. Jones and the staff, Krispy Kremes once a year, sure. Twice a year, of course. Krispy Kremes once a quarter, yeah. Krispy Kremes once a month, fine. I don't care. They're donuts. What about Krispy Kremes every 2 weeks? I don't know. What about Krispy Kremes every week? I'm feeling more uncomfortable. It's that sliding scale. It's same thing with lunches. Lunch once a year, Jason's Deli or Pizza Hut, sure. Twice a year, yeah. What about dropping off pizza once a quarter? I think I'd be okay with that. Beyond that, I don't know. I'd start to scratch my head. So, and one other thing, and again, we could really get down in the weeds here. There we're talking about Dr. Jones's staff. As far as Dr. Jones himself is concerned, Stark says that 2021, Jeff's Pharmacy can spend up to $429 on meals and golf games and everything else with Dr. Jones. If Dr. Jones is part of a 5-physician group, we can spend I can spend $429 on each of those 5 doctors. That doesn't apply to Dr. Jones's staff.
Right.
So again, Dr. Jones's staff, we just have to be smart about it. So does that answer your question, Bonnie?
Super clear.
Okay. Okay. Next slide.
Just as clear as the AKS can be.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The AKS does have a number of safe harbors where the OIG is trying to be clear. A safe harbor is essentially a hypothetical fact situation that the OIG says, listen, if you fit within all of these requirements, strictly fit within all of these requirements, then you're okay, you're good to go. Practically speaking, most of those safe harbors are extremely difficult to fit within. Very few arrangements that we see on a normal daily basis will actually fit strictly within each of the requirements of a safe harbor. The good news is that doesn't mean that the anti-kickback statute is automatically violated, that anyone's done anything wrong. Instead, it means we need to look really carefully at all of the facts and circumstances, as Jeff just mentioned. How often, how much, what is it? There's going to be a difference between a fine steakhouse dinner every week and the donuts that Jeff mentioned. So we need to look at the facts just as the OIG would, take it one step at a time, look at how many of the factors within a safe harbor the activity might actually meet, because that will be relevant as well. And so when we look at the safe harbor, you have to think of that sliding scale that Jeff just mentioned. From, we can say, if it fits within absolutely every requirement, okay, you're safe. The reality is very few things do. And so we have a low risk to high risk scale. And the reality of the situation is almost everything that we look at fits somewhere on that scale. And each attorney, each provider, each person's risk tolerance on that scale is going to be a bit different.
Okay, next slide.
Another set of, they're not rules and regulations, but they're places where we get really good information about the OIG's thinking about what we are allowed and are not allowed to do. Our advisory opinions, fraud alerts, advisory bulletins. The OIG issues a variety of different methods of providing information to providers on their current thinking. And it's important to realize that sometimes these things change through time. Advisory opinions are retracted. So again, going back to Jeff's, if it feels wrong, if your stomach says no, even if you see something that says yes, you might want to be just a little bit careful.
I'm sorry, go ahead, Kelly.
Speaking very briefly about advisory opinions in the process, this is where a specific provider, a specific group, or maybe in the case of a joint venture, a group of providers, go directly to the OIG and say, hey, listen, this is what we're trying to do. here are the facts, here's what we understand. Generally speaking, you're going to provide all of the agreements that have been drafted to support the relationship amongst the parties. And you're going to go to the OIG and say, we'd like your blessing. Now, practically speaking, it's a long process. There's generally a back and forth with the OIG. You have the opportunity to answer questions, to provide refinements on areas that the OIG may say, listen, we're largely okay with this, but these factors here, we don't like them. So let's change them. And so you get that opportunity. Before the OIG actually issues a final advisory opinion, you do have generally the opportunity to retract that request, to pull it back and say, we know this is not going our way, so let's move on. Now, what you do after that is up to the parties involved, but you do have that option. And so, as a rule, you'll see very few OIG advisory opinions that are in the negative. It's generally positive treatment. Go ahead,
Now,
Jeff.
those of you, if at 10:30 at night, all you do is watch Colbert or Kimmel or Fallon, instead dig out your iPad, go to Google, type in Office of Inspector General. The OIG is an agency under the Department of Health and Human Services, just like Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services is an agency under DHHS. The OIG is made up of a bunch of really smart attorneys. And when you go to the website, as Kelly mentioned, you're going to see all kinds of stuff. You're going to see hundreds of advisory opinions. You're going to see a large number of fraud alerts and advisory bulletins. Some will be specific to pharmacies, others will be specific to hospitals, others will be specific to labs, so on and so forth. But by reading this, you'll get a pretty good feel for what we can and cannot do. And so all kidding aside, it's really worth going to the website and taking a look at it. Okay, Bonnie, next slide. I've already covered this, so go to the next slide. Okay, Kelly, I think you got this one, and then I'll take over from there.
Absolutely. So as we've talked about, there's a tremendous amount of federal laws, regulations, guidance out there that we need to be concerned about. But the reality is it doesn't stop there. Different states have different laws as well. Every state has some level of regulation over kickbacks, fee splitting, patient brokering, self-referrals. And so before you do anything, you also need to make sure you look at your state laws and make sure that you're complying with those as well. Because in many states, these laws actually go further than they do under federal law. So they don't just apply to federal healthcare programs. They can also apply to any third-party payer, the BCS, the Humana, the Aetna. And in some cases, in some states, it can apply to cash patients as well. And so if you don't know what's happening in the state that you're operating in, you risk running afoul, even if you're good at a federal level.
Okay, Bonnie, next slide. Now, there is a program out there. It's called the Hospital Readmissions Reduction Program. Remember what I said, we have 78 million baby boomers that are retiring at the rate of 10,000 per day. Most of us are going to grow old and our bodies are going to break down. It's really expensive to a hospital. No, let's be back up. It's really expensive for the Medicare program. For a hospital to have what are called frequent flyers. And here's what I mean. Mr. Smith, 78 years old, is admitted to St. Mary's Hospital for COPD. Medicare pays a bunch of money to St. Mary's Hospital for that. And then he's discharged and he goes home, and 18 days later, he's readmitted back to St. Mary's for the same thing. Well, that's really expensive to Medicare. So Medicare is putting a bunch of responsibility back on the hospital. Medicare is, and this is the Hospital Readmissions Reduction Program. Medicare is saying to St. Mary's, listen, if Mr. Smith is readmitted within 30 days after being discharged, for this particular disease state, congestive heart failure or COPD or some of the others. That means you, hospital, you didn't do your job when you took care of them the first time. So therefore, we're going to pay you less money next calendar year. We're going to penalize you. Well, that gets the hospital's attention. So from the hospital standpoint now, when it discharges the Mr. Smiths of the world, it wants to be comfortable that they're not coming back in anytime soon. And so this is when, and we've prepared a number of these, Jeff's Pharmacy can approach St. Mary's Hospital and say, hey, listen, we'd like to be your preferred pharmacy. Give patient choice, but if the patient doesn't express the choice, refer the patient to us. And we here at Jeff's Pharmacy, we will work extra hard by communicating with Mr. Smith, his adult children, his doctor, try to communicate with him to convince Mr. Smith to meet his doctor's appointments, take his pills, do things to try to stay healthy. We will give you, hospital, we will give these value-added services to the patient. And of course, the expectation is by doing this, then Mr. Smith will not become a frequent flyer. Now, there's kind of a there's kind of a fine line here, and that is if the hospital is asking Jeff's Pharmacy to do stuff that the hospital would normally have to do, then the hospital should pay Jeff's Pharmacy fair market value compensation. But there's a fine line between, if Jeff's Pharmacy is providing these post-discharge services, and this is just something extra that we're doing that normally the hospital will not be responsible for, then no, the hospital does not have to pay me any money for it. This is just my setting myself apart from Bonnie's Pharmacy. Mm-hmm. I'm saying to St. Mary's, I will, I would do these things that Bonnie cannot do. So this is important. Okay, Bonnie, next slide. Okay.
I have one question about that. Just so if I am a pharmacist and I just read Hospital Readmission Reduction Program, the first question, is this something that hospitals are generally familiar with if I wanted to pursue that? And the second full part of it, is this something that I could try to execute myself, or do I definitely need to get linked up with a healthcare attorney before even offering that kind of service?
Well, Kendall, that's a loaded question. You always need a healthcare attorney. I mean, you can't wake up in the morning or go to bed at night or work out of the gym without talking to your healthcare attorney. But I digress. Okay. Now, the short answer is and it's a really good question, Kendall. Every hospital is aware of this program. Many hospitals, though, don't know what to do with it, and they've not really thought through the concept of asking a pharmacy or a DME company or a home health agency or a family practitioner. Many hospitals have not thought about asking them to step in and provide value-added services to these patients to keep them from being frequent flyers. And so if you own Kendall's Pharmacy and you approach St. Mary's Hospital, yes, St. Mary's would know about the program, but probably would not know about the solution. And that's what you get to offer. You don't really need a healthcare attorney. This can even be verbal between Kendall's Pharmacy and St. Mary's Hospital. If you want something in writing, then we could, if you want something in writing, that's when you go to a healthcare attorney and say, please prepare a preferred provider agreement, where it's kind of toothless, just it emotionally ties the two people, emotionally ties the pharmacy and the hospital together, but it kind of locks them in as far as what their goals are. So now you don't really need us. unless you want to put something in writing. Does that make sense, Kendall?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what I was wondering. Thank you.
Okay, good question. Now, let's say that Just Pharmacy also has a DME component. Then it's perfectly okay for me to place inventory, canes, walkers, nebulizers, whatever, over at a hospital or in a physician's office or in a long-term care facility. And then when a patient is about to be discharged, then that patient, the facility will give the patient choice. If the patient says, I don't care where I get the nebulizer from, then at that point in time, the employee there at the facility can say, well, in that case, we have on site some inventory provided by Just Pharmacy and medical equipment. Would you like to use Just Pharmacy and medical equipment? And the patient says yes, then the patient can take the equipment home, and then Just Pharmacy and medical equipment takes over. Now, can I pay some rent to the hospital or to the long-term care facility for the closet? Sure, but there's no reason to. It's crazy to, because the rent would be minuscule. A closet is only so big, and so the rent would be just peanuts, so it's just not worth doing. Okay, next slide. We've already talked about that. Next one. Okay, here are just a couple of slides. Let me just touch on this real quickly. It is okay. If it's okay for I'll pick on Kendall now, for Kendall's Pharmacy to say to St. Mary's Hospital, hey, listen, if you refer to me, we will contribute to certain key charities out there. You hospital, you don't control the charities, you don't control where the money is going. These are just standard, recognized charitable organizations, and we're happy to contribute. That's okay. That's a win-win. Now, in fact, I'm going to pick on Bonnie on this one. I'm going to use the Socratic method and ask Bonnie to answer this question. Let's say I'm okay. Let's say that St. Mary's Hospital says to Just Pharmacy, hey, listen, we have an annual golf tournament. We want you to sponsor tee box number 11, and to help pay for this whole thing, it's going to be $3,000, Just Pharmacy. And of course, all of the money we get from this charitable golf tournament is going to go to the Kidney Foundation. Now, I would say, okay, I'd be okay with that. I would say, sure, that's not a kickback. We're good with that. But then if the St. Mary's Hospital comes to me and says, Jeff, we're going to have just a whole number of fundraisers over the next 12 months. We'd like for you to come in and, help contribute to each of these fundraisers. Maybe we're going to have 10 of these things over the next 12 months. We want you to participate. Put on your attorney hat, Bonnie. What do you think?
I think it's kind of like the donuts example earlier. It starts to become, at some point, there's a line, I guess.
Yeah,
where that line is. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a line there. It's kind of like, well, wait a second. I get it. This annual charitable golf tournament, I get that. But I'm not so sure about every month me forking out some money. That's starting to sound, my stomach starts hurting. So that's something where, what I may be willing to say as a pharmacy is, hey, look, hospital, we here at Just Pharmacy will decide on a case-by-case basis whether or not to support one of your fundraisers. We may very well support 3 or 4 of them, but it's going to be on a case-by-case basis.
I guess my question would be, maybe I'm overcomplicating it. Would the hospital not be offering? Obviously, it's a contribution sort of situation, so I would assume that they would accept contributions from anyone. So yes. Jeff's Pharmacy, Kelly's Pharmacy, Kendall's Pharmacy, everyone would be given the same opportunity to donate each month.
Okay, keep going.
So I would just question, it's not just for Bonnie's Pharmacy. hey, Bonnie, we're going to send patients your way if you donate. I mean, I know we're not saying that, but if everybody's given, if it's just an all-around option for all the pharmacies in the area to contribute to this, what's the issue, I guess?
Well, that's a good point. The fact, even if the hospital says to the 10 pharmacies in town, we're going to give you all equal opportunity to contribute. Nevertheless, if as a pharmacy we are going overboard in making charitable contributions, it doesn't really matter if we are the only pharmacy or there are 10 pharmacies. It just starts to feel uncomfortable.
Feel funny, yeah. Okay.
Okay, next slide. We already talked about that one. Next one. Now, these are some examples, and I'm watching the time here, Bonnie. Kelly and I are going to only go for another hour and a half, so we're in good shape. So,
That's good.
I know. So these are examples of legally acceptable value-added services. We just talked about this: the hospital readmissions reduction program, referred provider agreement, where we can offer value-added services to the patients who are discharged that refer to us. What we try to do is, call them, call their adult child. Hey, are you taking your pills? Are you going to go see Dr. Jones next Tuesday? Basic things to keep the patient healthy. That's okay. Next slide. Now, set myself apart from Bonnie. I have Just Pharmacy. I have invested the money to have on staff an RT or an RN. Bonnie doesn't have that. She has a couple of pharmacy techs who are valuable, but she does not have an RT or an RN on her staff. So I'm perfectly okay with Just Pharmacy advertising out there, advertising to doctors and to the community, saying, if you'll come to me, then we're going to, one of the services that we provide will be that on a monthly basis, you can have a Zoom conference or an in-person conference with our RN or RT, where our clinician will go over the drugs you're taking, just make sure that you're doing okay. That's a value-added service that I have invested the salary to hire these people that Bonnie hasn't. I'm okay with that. Next slide.
I have one quick question that we've got someone put on here. What is the difference between sponsoring a golf tournament a few times a week and seeing it as advertising?
Well, a few times a week?
That's what it says.
The answer is no.
But we donated to put our name on shirts. We see it as advertising, but in the golf tournament example, it seems that it would be like advertising. So I guess the question, kind of the difference between sponsoring or a contribution versus maybe an advertising for your business.
So
any comments there?
I'm with you. So I think the question.
She said she meant a year. A year. A few times a year.
Tell her if she's sponsoring a golf tournament once a week, a couple times a week, she's my type of client. She's going to pay me a whole lot of money.
I think Kendall may want to get in on that too, right? Kendall.
Exactly.
A couple times a week golf tournament.
All right.
Yeah.
No, I think is the question they're asking if it's okay if they can. Oh, I see. Okay, can they make up a bunch of T-shirts or golf shirts that has the pharmacy's logo on it and pass those around? Is that the question?
Right. You're right. Difference between advertising and.
Yeah, I mean, it's perfectly okay to advertise in the market.
Absolutely. Yeah.
In fact, a pharmacy, Just Pharmacy, I can go to Dr. Jones's office every single day, get on my hands and knees and beg for business. I can do that. I just can't pay him money to do it.
Right.
I can go to the hospital twice a day and beg for business. I just can't offer anything of value. Now let's talk about knit shirts, golf shirts, T-shirts. Let's talk about refrigerator magnets. Let's talk about ballpoint pens. Let's talk about whatever. That's perfectly okay. Now, a golf shirt with my logo on it is that might be more expensive than $15. It might be $22. And let's say that I give that out as gifts to different people who work at hospitals or doctors' offices or long-term care facilities. That doesn't bother me. I mean, nobody's going to get excited about that. Now, if, however, what I'm providing has a retail value of $89 rather than $22, then I don't like that. Or let's say that I come up with, I don't know, golf shirts, socks, whatever. But during the course of the year, I'm just constantly giving clothes, coffee mugs, other gifts to the same employees of the hospital or long-term care facility, where I'm just kind of bombarding them with stuff. No, I don't like that either. But if, but you know, during the course of the year, I am just maybe once a year I'm going to hand out a golf shirt. Maybe next year I hand out a coffee mug. If every time I drop by, I drop off some pins or refrigerator magnets, that's okay.
Right. So a new golf club may be pushing it.
Very much so.
Very much.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, basically, because that, yeah. I mean, a new, some new golf clubs is pushing it. Trip to Cabo is pushing it.
We have another question. Can a pharmacy offer any type of incentives to a present patient to refer patients? So for your patients, to a present patient, so you're already patient, for those to refer other patients.
Yeah, this is called refer a friend. I've dealt with this before. No, I mean, it's kind of a no. You know, if a pharmacy came to me and said, Jeff, I want to advertise a refer a friend, where if you refer somebody to me, you get a gift certificate, you get so many dollars off your next purchase, you get something of value. You know, Bonnie and Kendall and Kelly, that's not offensive to me. It's not abusive to me. It's not something where I think an assistant United States attorney, otherwise known as a federal prosecutor, would jump up and down and say, "Oh my God, you know, we got to put these folks out of business." It's not something that just makes my blood curdle, but it's just something that I cannot support legally. And the reason for that is, I'm gonna get down to it. You younger people have no idea what I'm about to say, but older people, we're going to talk about the definition of is. And I don't know, Bonnie's got this blank look on her face. Definition of is. This is a Bill Clinton thing a couple of decades ago. You know,
I was alive during Bill Clinton, just as an FYI.
You were not?
I was.
Okay. Okay. Now, I can advertise Just Pharmacy. Hey, listen, if you come switch over to me, patient switch over to me, then you get to walk away with a $15 coffee mug. Well, why is that okay? Because I'm offering an inducement, something of value to the patient. And what I'm offering has a retail value of $15 or less. So we're good. And we're meeting the exception to the beneficiary inducement statute. However, if instead I say to the patient, hey, listen, if you refer your neighbor to me and the neighbor comes to me, I will give you this exact same $15 coffee mug. Well, the beneficiary inducement statute does not come into play. We're not talking about inducement. We're talking about paying something. Do you hear that too, Bonnie? Okay.
Yeah, you're echoing a bit. I'm not sure why.
Okay, we good now?
I think you're fine.
Okay, so it's I'm offering something of value that is a kickback to John Smith to refer John Brown to me. There's a difference. The first situation, I'm just offering directly to the patient, switch to me, you get a coffee mug. Second situation, I say to the patient, if you refer somebody else to me, you get the coffee mug. That's a referral. That's a kickback. So that's what causes me some angst. Now, what we could do is, I could see advertising. Yeah, I could see advertising to all my patients. Hey, listen, if you really like me, if you really like Jeff's Pharmacy, go tell your friends, your relatives, your neighbors. Tell them to come use me. And then on an occasional basis, it's not in writing, it's not a formal policy, but I can just say, I can send out to my existing patients, particularly those who have been referring others to me. I can say, listen, you've been such a great patient. I appreciate your loyalty. Here is a $15 coffee mug. It's not tied into referrals. I'll give it when I want to. I'd be okay with that. So there's that distinction.
Okay. Got a few more questions.
By the way, go on ahead. Let's just go with questions and
okay.
And
these are good. This is good talk.
And whatever we don't cover in the slides, you folks can read on your own. And if you have follow-up questions, Bonnie, everybody, if you have follow-up questions, email Kelly and me. We will respond. We will not. Those will be off the clock. We won't charge. We will, however, send an invoice to Bonnie for our time, but we won't charge anybody else. Okay,
that
Bonnie,
sounds like
go
a
ahead.
plan. How does insert whatever big box name you want to use get away with a $5 gift card for people who get their COVID vaccine? Is this a nominal amount situation?
Yeah, that's something that falls into a category all its own. Technically, a gift card is cash equivalent. Technically, that would not fit within the nominal value exception to the beneficiary inducement statute, but who the heck cares? And there's a much greater purpose behind all this. That would be okay.
Okay.
Doesn't bother me at all.
Okay. What about a drawing once a month for referring a patient?
I don't like it. I see something like that. A drawing, so you get a drawing. If those customers that refer folks to me will put their name in the hopper and we'll do a drawing. Is that right?
That's right.
Now that's the same thing as Bonnie. That's the same thing as saying to John Smith, if you refer your neighbor, I'm going to give you a coffee mug. This drawing is something that is something potentially of value. It kind of smells. I don't like it. Okay. But I'll tell you what I have approved in the past, and that is Bonnie's Pharmacy goes through a complete remodeling, and so we want to have an open house, a 1 week open house, and so everybody who comes through puts her name into the fishbowl. At the end of the week, there's a grand prize drawing, and the winner gets an $800 iPad. I'm okay with that. Okay. I'm not offering an iPad. I'm offering a chance to win it. If there are 800 names in the fishbowl, then each person, what I've offered is a $1 chance of winning. But let me pose this to you, Kendall, and put you on the spot now. Let's say that I have this open house because I've just remodeled my pharmacy. I like this so much that I'm just going to have this type of drawing for a iPad every month for the next 12 months. Kendall, what are your thoughts?
Well, it seems to me that it's not for the grand opening at that point because it's every month for the 12 months.
Yeah, so there's not a legitimate reason to be doing this. It feels funny.
Yeah.
Someone also says, isn't that considered gambling? Because there's an odds ratio.
Well, actually, it's funny you should say that because we do represent a national association that wanted to, I think it wanted to send lottery tickets to its members throughout the United States. There's not a kickback there. It's a nonprofit organization that wants to do something really nice for its members and wanted to send lottery tickets to everybody. So it's not like there's a kickback there. But Kelly, one of our partners, Kara Bockenheimer, and I looked at it and concluded that you have a bunch of state laws that say that you can't do this across state lines. There's a federal law, federal statute that says you can't do that. Okay.
Got one more question.
Okay.
Is the $15 or less the magic number you can offer to a patient to come to the pharmacy and get a $15 mug or $15 gift card? Can you offer $30 gift card, or what's the magic dollar value that you can't go over?
Good point. The answer is this. The magic number is 15. Now, I can offer Just Pharmacy. I'm still hearing that echo, but we're almost through. Just Pharmacy can offer a $15 coffee mug to Mr. Smith to come to me. I can offer 5 coffee mugs over the next 12 months. And so so every gift has to have a retail value of $15 or less. And then if I offer multiple gifts to Mr. Smith, then all those gifts combined cannot have a value of more than $75 for the next 12 months. To truly fall within the exception, it really should not be a gift card. It has to be something that can be touched and felt. You know, a cookbook, box of chocolates. A gift card is a cash equivalent, so I would shy away from it.
Okay. All right. Okay, Kendall, you want to go over this RX assessment real quick before we jump off?
Yes. So just to let you know, thank you so much, Kelly and Jeff, for all the information. One service that we offer at sites to different pharmacists and independent pharmacies is the RX assessment. That's where we take a deep dive look at your accounting and your taxes, and we give you some recommendations based on what we see. Here at Sykes & Company, we have decades of just focusing on pharmacies. So if you have your gut feeling, you want a second opinion on what's going on with your tax situation, your accounting situation, definitely go to the Sykes website and go to the intake form and fill that out. And Jeff, Kelly, just to be clear, this is not a prohibited inducement. We will not be referring clients your way for this service, but you will leave with a wealth of knowledge from it. So,
hey, thanks, folks. It's from Kelly's and my
guys.
standpoint. You know, Sykes & Company, Kendall, all in, Scotty, all in, best of the best. So just stick with them and good things happen.
Okay. Thank you, guys. Have a good afternoon. Thanks, everyone, for attending and all the questions. See you next time.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.